Welcome to the show, everybody. Good morning to you. It's Hal Sparks filling in for Steph and the Mooks while they are away on vacation this Labor Day week, where affairs foreign have begun to have so dominated our conversation that we've almost forgotten that Monday was Labor Day, and probably the single most important thing we deal with as a country is, and I know I'm walking out on a huge limb here, our own lives. That's right. As much as other people's choices in a militaristic and nationalist sense definitely play on the American people in a sense of security and all those other things, we in many ways deal first and foremost with our own personal lives. Yes, that's true. They eat up most of our thoughts while this other stuff is going on. It also acts as a filter for a lot of our perceptions for everything. Whenever the budget fight comes up, for example, when Republicans are looking at the president's spending to either deal with the bailouts or do a stimulus package or help the auto companies or do something along the lines of subsidized insurance for some people, the idea is always that we are a country, and our budget is like a house. Family gets together around the kitchen table, and they understand that they've only got a certain amount of money coming in, and they can only have a certain amount of money going out, and they make a budget, and a country can be no different. Very important that we sit down like every family in this country has to do around the kitchen table and deal with our national security budget. It's important that, like, Dad's sitting there talking to Mom, and they're going, Mom's yelling about we should buy food for these kids who need to eat so they can stay awake in school, and Dad's saying, you don't understand, I moved us into a crappy neighborhood. We need a gun. Just like every family, we need to sit around as a nation and decide how we're going to spend our money. And by the way, I personally think that allegory, that analogy, is not only vast oversimplification, but foolish on its measure, because it never actually goes to the part where the house is in jeopardy. And I don't mean just from a security standpoint. I also mean from natural disasters. There are certain times when a house, dealing with a certain salary or a certain amount of money that's coming into the house, must deal with the fact that their children also must eat from this salary, and there's a hole in the roof. And if you don't patch the hole and you just feed the children, eventually the roof will cave in on the children. And so there's an element of, and this is my, of course, carrying this analogy we hear back and forth to its actual logical conclusion, its actual extension. The primary being that environmental and security factors do actually factor into you having a house. You just have an argument about what's best to do it. And in the case of when an environmental act hits the house, when you have to spend money to patch your roof and you don't have any more salary coming in because Dad's hours have been cut and Mom's hours have been cut, or both in their sales job or in whatever they do have either lost work because suppliers aren't buying, or they're in real estate and they can't sell, the market's frozen, whatever the reason is, the people in that household have taken a dip in income. Would be the analogy of the financial collapse we went through at the beginning of the president's first term. And the long-term effects of that are still felt in many households, and it is no different in this country. That being said, if you're sitting there in your living room and going, okay, we've got less work, the kids still need to eat and go to school, and we need gas to get to the jobs that we do have, and there's a hole in the roof, we're going to have to borrow money to patch the roof. That's it. We have two options. We can move, which for using that as a national analogy might work for Mitt Romney. Like, this economy is terrible. I'm moving all my money to the Caymans where it's safe. But as a nation, you can't move out of the house. You've got a mortgage. You are committed to being in this space. And you're sitting around the table going, we're going to have to borrow money to fix the roof. And the argument becomes, well, we've already borrowed money to pay for the house in general. We're already in debt. We pay the mortgage every month. We're stacking debt upon debt. The debt-to-income ratio in this household is going to go to 170% during this time that we are patching the roof and buying a gun. So the expression is, what's really important in this situation? You might think that there's criminals and people out there that want to kill us, and you might think we need a gun to repel that. Never mind that there are cops, whether you trust that they're going to come or not. This would be the analogy of the UN or NATO or other allies. They exist, and they should come when you call them. So they exist. So that's one more reason why we don't necessarily need the gun. But Dad thinks that if he walks around in front of the window waving the gun, the people who have the idea that they might rob the place of the stuff that they don't have anyways right now because everybody's broke will be even lesser. So the neighbors need to know I have a gun. I'm going to put a sign in the lawn that says armed response. And the wife in this argument, since I'm using a completely sexist analogy to begin with, is arguing that we should actually feed the kids and patch the roof before we start waving a gun around the neighborhood. Because you might think that there are villains in the world that actually have the capacity to get out of their house and come over to your house and rob you and take your stuff back to their house and have electricity to plug it in and use it. That's a big reach. But it's gonna rain tomorrow, and there's a hole in the roof. And so the argument falls after much back and forth. Okay, we're gonna borrow money to patch the roof, but it's gonna come out of your allowance. It's going to come out of the kids' allowance. It's going to come out of what we buy for clothing. We're going to put less gas in the car. We're going to walk to short distances to the store. We're not going to drive. We're going to save money that way because it's coming out of the... When we patch the roof, we got to offset the cost of patching the roof. That's important because we can't just borrow all the money to patch the roof. That's crazy talk. So everybody kind of agrees, and they borrow less money to patch the roof than they might actually need. They use a little chewing gum to get it together. They go, it's going to cost, in the case of the analogy of the house, $50 billion to patch the roof because of the tornado and Hurricane Sandy. And to patch the roof is going to cost you about $50 billion. You borrow about $46 billion and call it a day, and patch the rest of it with bubble gum and hope the rain isn't too bad. But when it comes to buying Dad's gun, he's like, okay, I gave you the money to patch the roof and scream bloody murder that we should feed these kids less and you should buy less clothing and we should have less gas to drive to work and to school. And we did that, and that was the balance we struck. But when it comes to buying my gun, it's going to be brand new, off the shelf. It's going to be shiny and huge, and I'm going to pay for it with cash. I don't care where it comes from. I'll pay for it with chunks of the roof if I want to. And isn't that the lack of conversation in the military action in Syria from the Republican side right now? There's a lot of missing parts of this conversation. But one thing I am not hearing from any of our Republican colleagues across the aisle is that bombs are hella expensive and you only use them once. And you would think that, and they don't necessarily go bad like eggs, so they can sit there and wait for the right opportunity. Obviously, they last a couple of years, and if you believe in, perpetual fear, you're going to think that that's, we're going to have an opportunity. Trust me. If we don't have one, we'll make one. Donald Rumsfeld, Richard Pearl, Bush Cheney. So that being said, where are those? Where are the fiscal hawks in all this? We can't spend money on fixing the damage caused by Hurricane Sandy. We can't upgrade our schools and roads that without cutting into food stamps and S-chip and preschool. But man, those bombs get a spit shine, and the budget for those things that's the first dollar out of your pocket. Dad's gonna have a big shiny gun, and the kids are gonna eat peanut butter.